Jason Rylands is my name. Very, very happy to be here today. As you can probably tell, unfortunately, I cannot speak Hungarian. So if there's any questions on that side, I'm sure someone can translate, but again, I think everyone seems to be okay with English. I'm a security specialist in AWS for our Europe Central region. Now, I'm not a specialist SA, I'm actually a sales specialist. So I am technical, but I'm not like one of our solution architects that you will meet this afternoon in the workshop. But hopefully, with the presentation today, I can give you a good overview of AWS security and where it fits in with the topics that you've seen already, the CloudFront and CDN delivery, and also then how AWS looks at security and how this fits into the overall architecture when you actually use AWS. The first thing I want to sort of talk about, it's a huge topic, right? So security for AWS, if you didn't know, from day one, security was, we used to call it job zero. We don't sort of say that anymore. It's not a good thing that we say anymore, but I still like it. It is really sort of like the absolute foundation of what we do. And one thing you can see, we've launched just recently, I'll put this up here, bookmark this or take a picture or something, is the AWS Trust Center. So this has all of the information that you may have questions on around AWS. So you may have questions on can AWS, like if I go onto can I see my data? Do I have to hand over my data if the American government goes crazy, like it seems to be doing some weird things at the moment? What happens, you know? So there's all of those answers, because again, we can talk for hours about this topic. All of those answers and resources and such are on this Trust Center. And it's really new and it's very, very good. So please have a look at that if you have any of those types of concerns or just curious, for example. Did you have a question? Sorry, I thought you put your hand up. No, okay, no problem. So we're going to talk about layered security services. So AWS looks at security services a little bit different from other vendors, and I just want to talk about how we the layering and how our security services work. Enabling threat detection. So again, we've talked a little bit about that so far. On that scale, and then automated response and remediation. And also, I will touch on, there is a new service that we launched. We launched so many services every day, it's so hard to keep up, like you just saw with the amount of hops and so on. But we have a new service, incident response service, which is just launched at re:Invent this year, back in November. And also now we have a partner play with this, so it can be partner-led, the incidents response. So with the partners Stormont today, it's a very, very interesting thing that they can do, incidents response. So it allows you to have experts at your fingertips in terms of if there are security events. So if you talk about if there's some sort of ransomware attack, so you have your architecture and your applications and things sitting on the AWS cloud, what are the steps you need to do? Right? If there's some sort of attack, whether that be, we just talked about bot attack, ransomware attack, or these types of things. So how do you actually respond? And AWS has a specific service for this, so we have experts with our enterprise support and these things, but also in conjunction with our partners now that we're able to essentially be an extension of our customers' security posture, which is an extremely cool service. Again, very, very good. If you're interested in that, come and have a chat to me afterwards. So, services to secure your cloud environment. So, we touched on a couple of things briefly before. We talked about with the CDN, there are things called Shield, which is a DDoS, and we have WAF, which is our web application firewall. But what happens when you want to be able to see some of the outputs for that? So we're collecting the data, how do we get a single pane of glass for that? So we have something called Security Hub. So Security Hub is our aggregate single pane of glass where a lot of this information comes up and can be displayed for you to look at. And then we have a whole lot of other services as well, things like detective, so being able to take those insights in Security Hub, and you don't want to be able to trawl through all of that. So using a service like Detective, again, using some of our models, and also now Gen AI is built into all of our services stuff now, that is actually going to pull these insights out for you, and also maybe even automate some of the responses. So you can have things, if certain events happen, then you can kick off Lambda, Event Bridge, other services to be able to mitigate and act really, really fast for any type of event. So the way that we look at security, which is a little bit different to other vendors, is that we don't have a one-stop shop. So there's not like one piece of software that does everything. And the reason we do that is we have a vast array of customers. And when you have one piece of software, generally it might do everything okay, but it doesn't do anything particularly well. Whereas when you have specific services that are doing something, they do particular things very well. But you need to know how to layer those services. So for example, customers that are modernizing, so they're moving towards containers, so Kubernetes and our Elastic Kubernetes service, should be using products like Inspector now. So Inspector is a particular product that looks at containers, can deep scan containers. You can incorporate that in your CI/CD pipelines in terms of if you're using like GitLab and things like that. So you can use Inspector to look at these containers before they go into the pipeline. So Inspector does that very, very well. So are there other services that can do that? Yes, there is, but that is particular for that. Detective, another one, can look really, really deep into Security Hub and the alerts that are coming out to be able to pull out things that are relevant. So again, using some of the stuff mentioned before, some of the learnings that we have from the MadPot, Honeypot information goes into Security Hub and goes into Detective, and it's able to give you a very good what's important and what should be prioritized in terms of this is going to be really bad and needs to be acted upon quickly, and what's nice to have, etc., etc. Because you need to triage, right? You need to be able to look at what's important. There's only so many people that can look at this, and the amount of things you need to be quick, you need to be able to automate, and you need visibility, observability. So this is how we look at our security services. We have a lot of security services. So one thing I want to mention as well, and it's on the Trust Center, is that we look at security from essentially chip to cloud. So one of the big differentiators of AWS is that we use our own silicon. So you may have seen that we have a chip called Graviton. We're up to Graviton 4 now. So if you're using services like RDS, which is our database service, or any of our services on which we have now many hundred, we're using our own silicon. And one of the other things we do is we have another system called Nitro. And Nitro is our encryption. So it encrypts the data at rest, it encrypts the data in transit. But what it also does, and it was very clever that they did this right at the start, is it offloads a lot of the traffic from the CPU. So
in able to do that, it allows the CPU to be used completely. When you go into EC2, our Elastic Compute, and you spin up an instance, it allows us to use the whole of the CPU. So when you're using something like, let's take virtualization, something like, it uses a certain amount of CPU to be able to do that. With Nitro, it offloads all of that, but it also gives us a very good security, which means that when you're on AWS, we have a different attack surface to other cloud providers where they're using, let's say, normal off-the-shelf hardware, right? So you have BIOS issues, specific chip issues. You know, if you launch an EC2 instance and it's an Intel instance, yes, of course, we use Intel. We use AMD, we have Mac, and we have our own hardware. But our underlying services use our software, so we have a bit of a different, it's not so easy, if you like, for us. So that's how we look at our security posture from the chip. And then on the cloud side, it is a shared responsibility model. And what do I mean by that? Because we get asked a lot about zero trust. And we have the services to enable zero trust. But the way that we run our cloud is that it's a shared responsibility model in that we run the cloud part. As I mentioned, we use Graviton and other things for our services like RDS and so on. And we secure that layer. But customers obviously can come along and add their data, their applications and things, and they're using things like S3 buckets, object storage and so on. And most issues that we see with security is things that essentially get unlooked at, which is like an S3 bucket, like is open to the public, right? So that's not necessarily an AWS issue, it's a not securing issue, but we have the tools and now the automation to look and scan and look at your environment and show, like for example, that you have S3 buckets which are open, or you have credentials. So we have things which, when we log in, it's called IAM. It's a who are you, what is the credentials that you're using and so on that you give, you know, root users and users and things like that. It's called IAM. And we have things like IAM Analyzer, which looks at that and looks at how the credentials are, and if there's any problems with credentials, too many root users or things like that. So the security services allow you to have the scalability, the functionality, and to lock everything down, but at the same time, it has to be flexible because you have applications which are facing either your own organization or the public. So you need to be able to serve web pages and so on, and of course that then is going to be attacked, right? So we saw how many of those things were happening just on CDN, right? So that's just on our edge, not our when we talk about our regions, then, you know, again, it's massive in terms of the amount of attacks and so on that come. And again, depending on the industry, so something like banking, so FSI, or betting and gaming, which was mentioned, is a huge target, especially with betting and gaming now also moving into the crypto space. So when you have large amounts of crypto, and some of these betting and gaming clients are actually almost crypto exchanges, they are a massive target for hacks. I think everyone's seen, like just recently, there was a lot of crypto stolen. It happens absolutely every day. So on our services side, so we split, just like you saw before with the CDN, we split them into essentially identify. So this is like our control tower, config, systems manager. Systems manager is a very good tool to automate things like patching. So if you have an instance which is running on AWS and it's a Windows server, AMI, and it needs it automatically can do that at scale, so I can do all the patching and things like that that you may have. So identify, protect. So again, I mentioned IAM, which is our credentials. We have identity center. We have directory service. So again, if you're using things like Microsoft Active Directory, we have directory service. That's on the protect side, our VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, Direct Connect, which again, Seji, our networking specialist this afternoon will talk about with our workshop. Detection, so guard duty is our mainstay, or if you like, North Star product in that area, and then everything goes around that, and then up to our security hub. So security hub gives you that single pane of glass. And then we have security lake. So security lake is if you have lots and lots of different, let's say, third-party services. So you're using things like Splunk, Curator, and other Prometheus, and other things like that. And you want, it's an SIEM software, which it aggregates all of these different alerts and things. So Security Hub is normally what we use for most customers, but for those large customers, then Security Lake comes into play. So that's on the detect side. And then we have the respond and recover. So, as I said, we split and layer the security services, because as a customer, you may not need all of these services. So you just need to put in the services that you need, pay for what you need, and scale as you need. So all of the great things that come with cloud, obviously. So that's the way that we look at this, so that you're not paying for things that you don't need, or you're also getting recommendations for things that you do need. You move to containers, you need Inspector. So again, just the way that we look and do this. So how do I enable threat detection at scale? So generally, the way that we like to do it is we designate a centralized administrator, member accounts, and then auto-enable services on all member accounts. So again, nothing unusual in that setup. We have continuous monitoring, security monitoring. So we need to understand what is the security posture. And again, as we mentioned, this is not set and forget. This is continuous. So you need to, it's always improving. So these guys, these bad actors aren't taking a holiday, so to speak. So they're always improving the way that they do things. We get that information through, again, our honeypots and so on, and we add that, and it just continuously improves. So we need to understand the attack surface. So things like Macy, for example. So Macy looks very deep into S3 buckets and uses, again, a lot of the Gen AI. Looks for anomalies, some things that are unusual. So it tracks over time. So a lot of these services are actually looking at your architecture, looking how your traffic moves, what are the normal patterns. And when things move out of normal patterns, which could indicate things like a DDoS attack or a botnet or some sort of ransomware or phishing or any of these types of things, this is where you get the alerts, and Security Hub will bring these up. And when we look at security compliance and regulations, so there are things, for example, like in financial services, there's DORA, and then in other areas there's NIST, which is used. So NIST 2 is the latest one. So you may have from your CIO or CISO or board that's saying, well, we need to comply with NIST. So what are we doing in our architecture to comply? And you can see here that we have NIST functions. So we have identify, NIST function, detect, investigate, correlate, still under detect, and then we have respond. So if anyone has any questions on this, it is a big topic. Again, we can talk about this later, or again, it's on the Trust Center on how we actually comply or allow customers to comply with these regulations. So, I just want to talk about Inspector and Detective, but Inspector first. Inspector gives you continuous vulnerability management at scale. As I mentioned, this is normally used when customers are modernizing and moving to containers. It does other things as well, but container security is where it really does come into play. Again, I don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm just going to skip through some of these services. So again, if you've got any more questions on specific services, we can have a chat about them later. How it works, you can see it's very easy to enable. And one thing I will mention is on the AWS console, you can just go on and you can turn on Inspector, and it's a 30-day free trial. So most of the services act like this. So turn it on, have a look at it, and if you don't need it, you'll want to turn it. But you find that a lot of the customers that turn these services on, get value out of it. But again, it allows you to try. So it's really, really easy. So how it works, you enable it on the console. It has automated workload discovery. It has a vulnerability database. It has the real-time results, gives you those, and again, surfaces that up to Security Hub, and then you can take action based on however you normally do it. So are you doing stuff automatically? So you're using things like Event Bridge and Lambda and stuff to kick off, like shut down instances on these rules or however you want to do it. And again, I mentioned detection and incident response service. This is where, again, some of our partners are coming in, like Stormont, which can actually do the take action part as well. So if you're having that type of integration with Stormont or your partners, they can also do this as well. So continuous discovery and scanning. That's really important. It's not something that you sort of scan, get results, and then okay, yeah, I might scan in the future. It's continuously doing that from then on, right? So it's looking at the workload, scanning it continuously, and doing it because it builds up what is normal on your workload, what is normal in your architecture, what is normal traffic patterns, and it does, again, the longer you have it, the better it gets, essentially. And then support for Lambda functions. So by using Event Bridge and Lambda, you're able to actually do automation. So if you can set some rules to shut down certain workloads or instances or whatever you're doing. So say, for example, you're getting really bad traffic patterns and it's coming in from a country that essentially your customers are not sitting in, you can automatically instigate like firewall rules or WAF rules or things like that to shut that traffic down really, really quickly. And then prioritize and contextualize scoring. So I mentioned triage before. So it gives you, what should you act on first? Because again, something happens. What are the actions you should take? So what are the most important things and issues that are surfacing here? And how do we triage that? So and this is the essentially the score, the security metrics, which are again being coming up into our security hub. And we get a lot of information we provide information to a lot of customers, but again, on our side, we get a lot of information which comes into our databases from other vendors as well. And it comes from the National Vulnerability Database. Scoring, for example, comes into here. So Macy, I mentioned before, this looks at
one of the word really is for S3. So it's looking at your object storage, it's looking at your inventory, your policies. I mentioned before about buckets that are open and shouldn't be. So things like this can be discovered quite easily using these services. Macy being one of the Security Hub will also do this, but Macy will look very deep into your object storage and scan for someone's put something into an S3 bucket. It may be a third-party developer has put something in a bucket, not realised that it has some sort of ransomware or some sort of Trojan or something like that. This is where Macy can look and do this for you. Again, and at scale. So the way that Macy works, as I mentioned, set S3 bucket policies. It can look at, okay, what buckets are unencrypted, should they be? What are publicly accessible, should they be? Because of course you've got buckets that should be publicly accessible, right? Because you've got some web pages and other things that are stored there which you're serving to CloudFront or anything, or shared outside of the account and replicated. And again, this goes on and it's continuous monitoring. So as you add more buckets and add more things to those buckets, it's continually scanning those. And then Security Hub, as I mentioned, this is where all of those services, Detective, Inspector, Macy, like where do they send their alerts? These go up into Security Hub, and then again, if you are a larger customer, Security Link. And then automated security and compliance checks here. Excuse me. So again, when you look into the security area, there's a lot of compliance and regulation. So, for example, the PCI, payment card data industry, has compliance and regulations. You have security best practices, you have NIST, you have DORA, and there's many things to do with regulation. There's sovereign regulations like KVKK in Turkey and other things in the Middle East where you have to keep data on premises or within the country. How do you do that? What guardrails do you have in place, and are you actually compliant to that? So this is where the Security Hub and other things like there's another service called Audit Manager, for example, can give you all of that information as well. So continuous security monitoring. So you get the idea. So the way that these things are working is they're all working together in a layer. So use the right services for what you are doing. If you don't use containers today, then maybe you don't need to use Inspector. If you don't have necessarily a lot of compliance things, maybe Audit Manager you don't need. But so you can just pick and choose which of the security services that you should be using. And then guard duty, again, is if there's any service that I would recommend that you turn on, because generally you get, when you start on AWS and you launch an EC2 service, things like CloudTrail and CloudWatch, which are really, really foundational, just come along essentially with your environment when you're turning on. You don't necessarily have to use them, but again, I would recommend that you do. And then the next thing, if I was to say to turn on anything, is guard duty. So guard duty, along with, if you're using CloudFront, which is Shield, which is free, so why would you not use it? Shield Advanced you pay for, but Shield is free, is guard duty. So guard duty is our, if you like, flagship security product, which is, again, very easy, one-click activation. You just go onto the console, you turn it on, continuous monitoring, global coverage, and gives enterprise consolidation and management on there. So if you take anything away today, if you're not using guard duty, go and turn that on. So how it works, so again, on guard duty, you have a whole lot of data sources. So that can be from CloudTrail, which I mentioned before. 1 minute left. So as mentioned, this is like such a huge topic. I could talk for hours on this, and I've cut it right down. But anyway, you take a whole load of events. It could be from S3, it can be from CloudTrail, it can be from your databases. It comes into guard duty, and we use, again, machine learning, the threat intelligence, which is coming from all different sources, and then the continuous learning to give you actionable, accurate, and contextual things that you need to do with your security posture. So where are your risks? What is like red hot now? What is, you need to look at later? How do we triage this? And it has contextual data, so you can really then look at, okay, what database was accessed? Where was it accessed from? Has this user previously accessed this database? Like, is this unusual activity? Because again, we all get these like Google alerts, like you logged in from another computer, like was that you? It's like, it's painful, but yeah, it's probably good to know, right? It was me. But I'm waiting for that notification when it's not me. So contextual is very important. And then integration, as I mentioned, all of these things integrate with each other. They're AWS native services, and then it gives you a layer of of depth, of context to keep your security posture. So if you're moving to zero trust, you're able to do that. We have the tools to be able to do that. So it just depends, again, on how your security posture should be and to what extent you need to do it. And then also, how do you respond to that, right? So we have a partner network which we can do with the incident response. So I'm getting the wind up. I did have a few more slides, but I think I've covered the majority of what I wanted to cover. I'll stop here for some questions, and then we better move to the next speaker. So, questions from anyone?
I guess are the slides going to be shared then?
Yes, we can definitely share the slides. It's no problem. Yeah. Again, my recommendation is, again, it's brand new. Have a look at Trust Center. Has some great information on there. All the things I've covered, plus all of our like the burning questions of, who can see my data? Can you turn off my services? Like all of those things that people ask, about cloud services and being a US-based company, and all of those hot topics at the moment, they're all covered there. So please have a look at that. If there's no other questions, I will hand off to the next speaker. So thank you very much.